So, hi everyone, and welcome to Stardust. As you can see, I've already got this canvas sketched out. So if you've bought this off of the web store or you're doing this through Eventbrite, you will see that there is a sort of a reversed version of the black and white image. And basically what the idea is you can print that out to scale to the size that you want. You flip it over and with a pencil, you scribble over the black lines and then you flip it back and you can trace over them. I use a biro because I find that with a pencil, what happens is as it wears down and the lines get thicker and thicker and more indistinct. Whereas with a biro, it keeps the same kind of thickness all the way through. And what you might find is you've got some sort of slightly paler bits. So don't be afraid to kind of go over those with pencil. Normally, I'm always saying in these sessions to go as lightly as you possibly can. But with this particular one, you do need to be able to see really well where your lines are. So it's quite a good idea to go quite thick and heavy. And also because this is black and white, this painting, you don't have to worry too much about picking up, here's someone else, about picking up the greys, because what happens with this particular painting is we start off with the darkest colours and then we progressively get lighter and lighter each time we add another layer. So I've got the image on a share screen that I'm going to sort of flip backwards and forwards with you. The painting that I did, the original of this, was for a live session, and the woman who picked the painting, who runs the cafe, loved it so much that I gave her the painting at the end of the night. So I don't have the original of this one anymore, which is why I'm doing the share screen. So Helena, hi, are you okay? Did you understand all the instructions about how to transfer your picture onto your canvas? Hello? No? Yes? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, because your mic's off and your camera's just black.
Hiya.
Oh, hiya.
Hi, hey, how are you doing? I just popped in. I may not be able to stay that long because of some responsibilities I need to take care of, but this will be recorded, right?
Yeah, I'm recording it right now. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. So I'll need to go ahead and leave now.
So did you understand about the printing this off and transferring it over onto your canvas?
Yes,
did you?
I do. Yes,
yeah.
I do.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna waffle on a bit more then. So what we're going to do with this particular painting is we're going to basically paint the background in black, get that blocked in. My personal preference with this is to try and do two coats, because I find that even with a good black, it can be quite patchy and you'll get a lovely flat finish to the black background with that. Obviously, you're not stuck with having to stick, you don't have to stick with black. This would work equally well with, you could make it sort of like navy, or you could make it into a bit of a sunset, as long as it was really dark up to the top, at the top, and got sort of paler as you went down, that would work equally well. And then your lady could be in silhouette. So you can change the colours up a little bit if you want to. So the real key to this painting is about, don't get caught up in sort of like having to start things and finish things. It's about, a lot of it is about the suggestion of there being something there, rather than you actually having to kind of like, for example, on this arm here, you don't have to put in all of the details. You don't have to have like ends to fingers and things like that, because you're suggesting that there's there by putting the highlights on, and you're leaving out the bits that are in shadow, and your brain will do the work for you, so you really don't have to worry about that. So brushes wise, I'm going to start off with, I've got a 1 inch flat square, and I'm going to get some coverage in around to start off with. So I'm just going to use some black acrylic. I tend to use with my sessions the Crawford and Black paint from the Works, because I tend to find that for the price that what you're spending on it, it's actually very, very good value for money. With this particular painting, I like to have 2 water pots. Oh,
on mute.
that's okay. I'll keep one for the darker colours and one for the lighter colours, just to help keep it a bit clean and stop it to get too sludgy. So are you guys all okay to start painting? Yeah, cool. So I'm gonna just take some black paint. I'm gonna grab a bit of water, just water it down a little bit. If you're like me and working on a stretched canvas, I'm gonna paint around the edges to start off with. I am actually going to go right the way down to the very side for now. And I'm going to do 2 coats with this black, just to make sure I get a really good even coat. And I'm going to go up to my lines, and I'm just basically going to paint around my lady at the moment. So I've not used too thicker consistency with my paint. Stand up to do the top, because I want to keep this nice and flat, particularly with this first coat. So are you doing okay, Sally? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, no, I'm with you now.
Cool.
Mine won't be quite as refined as yours.
So if at the end of your session you end up, hopefully you will be pleased with your young lady, what I would suggest doing, if you've got some, or you sort of paint regularly and are thinking of getting some, give this a little spray of a varnish or something, because I tend to find with the sort of predominantly black ground paintings, or the darker ground, because the acrylic's so dry, sort of got such a dry matte finish to it, it ends up getting marked really, really easily, and you get little kind of like, or it might just be me because I end up sort of storing them all in boxes. They tend to get little marks on them very easily. So I just have I think you can get them, I think they're about £10 from Amazon. You can get like even a matte or a gloss varnish spray, like a little can of it, and you just need to give it one little sort of spray over, and it'll help just to protect the painting. And it's a good idea if you're sort of thinking about keeping any of your paintings that you do, and you've done them on canvas, even on paper, actually, you can give them a little spray of the varnish. It just kind of keeps them looking nice and good. If you go with a gloss one, you do need to give it a few coats, but the great thing about the gloss is it'll really bring out extra depth to your colours. So that's something to kind of think about. So once I've got to this stage, I'm going to switch from my big brush down to a smaller one. And I am going to, oh, I've put a tissue over that side. Yeah, I'm going to switch over to a smaller brush, and I'm going to get in and around her to sort of fill in. So if I was painting this painting from scratch myself, like for me, and not sort of demonstrating it, the other option of doing this would be to paint your entire canvas a couple of layers totally of black, and then transfer your trace like onto it. The reason I've not done that tonight is because if I tried to do a pencil line on a black background, it just wouldn't show up on the camera at all, and you guys wouldn't be able to see it. So that's why I do this particular painting the way I do. Whereas if I was doing if I was to do this again and not be recording it, I would just go straight with a black background and then work on top of that. So this way is a little bit more long-winded, but it just means that you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm switching over. I've got another flat square, but this is about, I wouldn't even say a quarter of the size of the other one. And it just means that I can get right in around her. So I'm kind of going over her fingers, but I'm actually making them a bit thinner than I want them to be at the end, because we're going to build this up and come back and put sort of like highlights and shadows and things like that on. So you don't have to worry too much about that. As long as you can see where they are roughly, that's good enough at the moment. So I'm now gonna, because I want to keep this nice and flat, and you can see, you'll be able to see the brush marks. I've gone up to a, this is about a 1/2 inch flat, and I can just fill in these last gaps. Get the paint nice and flat. You might find that you need to go and add a little bit of water by now to your black paint, because black seems to sort of dry out really, really quickly and become gunky very fast. So I want to keep that texture nice and flat and nice and fluid. So I'm going to give my brushes a little bit of a wipe out on the tissue. And then give them a nice clean. So I'm keeping to my dark water, my sort of darker shades, and giving that a quick chance to sort of dry off for a minute. So I can see now already where it's starting to dry, it's going really patchy. So I'm going to, we're going to paint in some grey and then come back and give our black another coat when it's dry. So did everyone have a nice Christmas? Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a quiet one this year, but at least it was a bit more normal than the last few years.
Yeah. I think everyone just wanted a quiet Christmas this year, really.
I know. It all felt really manic leading up to it.
Yeah. I had so many reef making sessions.
Oh, yeah.
It was absolutely insane. I had 3 weeks. Well, I had 4 weeks of reef making sessions, but 3 of them were solid every night. Yeah. It was.
Yeah, that's full on.
I couldn't believe that I didn't just like fall ill as soon as it finished. Once, like, yeah. I
Yeah.
do. This sounds like I've got a massive head, and I don't mean it like that, but I do understand what rock stars say when they go on tour and you get, like, in the evening you still get this buzz of adrenaline, and like, even though you're not doing anything, because yeah, I really struggled to, it took me like a good week and a half to stop being like running around and trying to like do everything as quickly as possible because I had so much to do. So
oh, bless you.
Yeah, one of the days was this big corporate thing, and I ended up I was out doing a session the night before. I got in from that at 11, and then I had to make wreaths for them to decorate at the corporate, 50 of them at the corporate thing the next day. So I then made wreaths until 1, went to bed, got up at 5, and then carried on making so that I could deliver them at the venue the next day.
Oh my God.
I was like, I'm not doing this again.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
So, and I only got booked for it a week beforehand.
Oh.
So, but I did it.
You did indeed. Such a nice thing to do as a corporate thing. I did mention it to our guys, but unfortunately they'd already booked everything up months before. I'm
already getting bookings for like inquiries for next year.
Wow.
So
fantastic.
Yeah, I've kind of said, okay, but let me just go to I've got a couple of venues who they've been with me right from the start, like my very first venues. And I said, let me get them booked in first. Because, you know, they've always been so good to me and I wouldn't want to ever let them down. So I said, let me speak to them, book those in, and then I'll take bookings for everything else. So
yeah, makes sense.
Right, so I'm going to do a quick share screen of the original. We hope we have the technology. There we go. Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what we're aiming to do is get this like lovely flat black background, and we are going to fill her in with grey, a sort of mid-grey. Something to keep in mind when you're painting grey and mixing grey is that it dries darker than what it appears when it's wet. So you want to go a couple of shades lighter than the what you want as an end result. And we're going to build up layers with the greys and different shades of that, with white and with black and things like that. But we want to start off by getting some of her sort of blocked in grey, and then we can sort of start working on from there. So don't worry if there's any bits that you've missed or anything like that, because we're going to come around, give another coat of black. And also you've got areas like the base of the skirt and her neck and the shadow under her arm, which are predominantly black. So we'll sort of, you can even leave the grey off of those for now, and we can come in with the black to do that. So what I'm going to do is mix myself up some grey. I'm going to give myself, so on my plate, I'm going to give myself some white. Give yourself plenty, being really generous with it. And it's always better to take some of the white, some of the black, and add it to the white a bit at a time, than it is to kind of try and add the white to the black, or add equal measures. So I'm going to take some black, get it mixed in. So we want to go a kind of mid grey. So we can go lighter and darker from there. I'm going to grab one more bit of black, I think. Let's see, there we go. Maybe one more.
Will you put it back onto the painting screen, Tony?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Right.
So there we go. You can tell so all of my kind of like Zoom thing has been packed away for over Christmas. Totally out of practice, and I've set it all up, and it's like everything's in slightly the wrong position. And then I've got to do screen share on top of like trying to remember to do everything else. This is gonna, yeah, be a disaster today, I think. So I've got quite a good sort of mid-grey colour there, and once I'm happy with that, remembering it is going to dry a little bit darker, so I'm gonna get my paint to my consistency that I want. You can see I've got a bit of paint around the metal on my brush, so before I start painting I'm going to wipe that off, just get my brush all nice and clean and smart, so that I've got some control over what I'm doing. That is one of the main sort of reasons that beginners struggle, is because they're trying to paint with too much paint on their brush, and it just makes it so much more difficult. So I am going to start by blocking in some of the areas. I'm going to use this paint quite thinly, because then I can still see my guidelines underneath. So we're going to go over all of this. So it doesn't matter. This is kind of like a bit of a wash, really. We're going to go around it again in with the black, so you don't have to worry too much about your edges and stuff at the moment. And the other good thing about kind of just getting, even if it's quite a watery grey over this at this stage, is it will seal in any pencil marks and stop them from kind of smudging too much. So that's not so important with this particular painting, but it's something to kind of keep in mind. If you ever do a pencil drawing and you're kind of going over it with a colour, particularly if it's something like a yellow, it always picks it up and starts going a bit green. But if you can do, even if it's a white coat over the top, it'll seal your pencils in, lines in a bit and help you get it nice and kind of flat colour over the top. That is going. So I'm not worried about getting sort of brush strokes in there that are showing. And what I'm going to do is just rub over them in the same kind of direction as my drawn lines are. Come up into the hair. So the back of the neck is just all in shadow and black. So it's up to you if you want to leave it and just go over it with black when we get to that point, or if you want to cover it with your wash. So I'm turning my brush on its side to go along sort of the hands and the fingers and stuff like that. So don't have to worry too much about picking up any of my background. Everyone getting on okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me a little thumbs up or anything when you've got your grey. Or I was not expecting such a large thumbs up then.
Really there.
That's okay. So we're gonna sort of block in the shadow, and hopefully by that point our background will have dried and we can give that its second coat. So I'm going to become like a broken record this evening and keep going on about, don't get caught up in having to kind of put lines where you think they should go. You're only going to be painting in the highlights and the shadows of this. And my art teacher used to say it's just as good to be a lazy painter, because you don't have to put all the information in there, that I will fill it in for you and it will do a much better job than your paintbrush will. So so that's something to kind of keep in mind. So this is as much about what we leave out as what we put in this particular painting. And when we come to things like her skirt, you want to get nice, loose, flowing, fluid strokes and make it all feel nice and give her kind of like, it'll give her some movement. And the same with her hair as well. So I'm going to screen share again. If I start trying to demonstrate something and I forget to turn it off the screen share, let me know. Don't be afraid to shout. So what I want to do is just exactly the same as where we've blocked in our sky. I'm now going to start to block in some of the shadows. So I think you can see my cursor as I move it around as well. So areas where we can see shadows really predominantly is kind of around the top of her head here. Can you see me moving my cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So around the top of the head here, we've got this sort of back of the neck here. We've got along the side of this arm. So the arm is kind of like lighter, and we've got down to the right hand side, the shadow. and you can see the twists of the fabric and the pleating in her dress. So we're gonna kind of think about that, but don't overthink about that. You want to keep it nice and fluid. And then round the base of her skirt. So yeah, so what I'm going to do is keep myself some lines visible, some things that are going to help me to see where I'm going later on, but I am going to start to sort of block things in. You can also see, you know, on things like her hand up here, there's not a lot of information there. You don't have to worry too much about that. And also the arm that's tucking around her body, there's not a lot of information there. It's just suggestions of shapes. So that's something to really keep in mind. Okay. Right. So I'm going to stick with my 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'll switch over to my smaller one as and when I need it, but because I'm just blocking, I don't have to worry too much. So I need to know where the edge of her skirt is. So I'm going to leave myself a little bit of a line here. And I'm going to start to take some black up. And I'm going to I am going to keep coming backwards and forwards between the blacks and the greys and the whites and everything. So don't worry, as we add more info, we can come back and kind of build things up and take stuff out and flatten things down. So just leave yourself what you think you will kind of need. I really like these 2 lines here that kind of cross over each other. So I'm going to paint inside it so that I know that they're there. And I'm going to take that down to the bottom of the canvas. And I don't even have to leave myself sort of like thick whole lines or anything. I can leave myself just little bits of the lines so that I know where they are for later on. And I might actually decide to change them. The other thing to keep in mind with a painting like this that is very sort of fluid and loose is that your lines, you know, these lines are like this are very personal to the person who's painted them. Everyone kind of holds their brush at a slightly different angle, or sits at a slightly different angle at their canvas or whatever. So if you just try and do a straight trace off of mine, it's gonna look a little bit sort of just a little bit almost mechanical and not as fluid as if you use your own lines that kind of come naturally to you. So don't be sort of tempted to do exact copies of my lines, just use them as suggestions of sort of roughly where to place things. So, and then over on the right hand side, so we lose a little bit here. Come back. My grey later on. So that started to get a bit of kind of blocking into the base, and then I'll come back again sort of once that's dried just to sort of flatten it out a little bit. And then I'm going to go up. So we've got her bodice So this is all to the right of the arm, and I'm just kind of bringing some strokes up across into her body. So the only bit that's really sort of important here is that where you meet the arm at the moment. So and then I'm just going to turn my brush on its side and start to put a few kind of lines going across. I'm also going to go do a few going up into that sleeve. And I think I'm going to switch over to my smaller brush for a second. And then I can go in under her hair. So this is her, the back of her neck. I do need to keep a little bit of info there about where the edge of her neck is. So go in round, just leave those bits. And then go up into her bum as well. The great thing about doing this using black straight out of the tube that we haven't messed around with is if we do go wrong at any points, it's very easy for us to correct it. And then we've got up here, kind of like where her roots are. So I'm going to just pop in a little bit of shadow into the top of her head there. Bring this out on the shoulders a little bit. And then I've got, so we've done the bodice to the right of the arm, and then I'm just gonna start to bring in a bit of shadow down here. So we can't really see where her arm wraps in front of her bodice, and we can't really see that much of the bodice of her dress either. So we can just kind of take that out. At the moment she looks, because we haven't got any shading on there, this looks really weird, but by the time we start to add a bit more shading, add a bit more sort of highlights and stuff, that will start to make a bit of sense. Everyone doing okay? Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to mute my mic for a sec. And I am going to give my canvas a quick blast with my hairdryer just to get it dried off, ready for when you guys are ready to move on. So excuse me 1 second. So I've given that a blow dry. You can see how patchy that black background is, even though I tried very hard to get it nice and even. So that's why I like to try and give it a second coat. So when you're free and ready, crack another black coat onto your background. So I'm just going to go around the edges again. I'm using my 1/2 inch flat brush again, just to whip around the edges where needed. You will need to add a bit more water to your black paint. At this stage, it will definitely have started to have dried out from earlier on. And it's always better, whether you're doing something like this black, or particularly if you're doing a metallic or anything like that, it's better to give it 3 or even maybe 4 thin coats than to try and paint with paint that's too thick, because you'll never get it flat and even. No matter how many thick coats you put on, you'll get lumps and bumps in it. Whereas if you got it sort of nicely fluid, nicely watered down, and using a nice sort of larger size brush, you'll get a much smoother, flatter finish. So that's one side locked in. Carefully go around the other side.
Yeah. Where is he?
So I've got all of my background, just got the little bits between our fingers to do. So I'm going to just switch over to my thin brush. Okay. So I'm going to ramble on a bit about landscape painting randomly when we're not landscape painting, but the theory of that works similarly to this. So when you do a landscape painting, you obviously want to create foregrounds, sort of mid distance and further away, and and rather than things looking flat, you create that by the depth of color and the intensity. And this kind of works in a similar kind of way. So anything that has got is lighter or got a strong contrast to it will jump forward towards you, whereas things that are more muted will move away and disappear. So for example, where we've got her arm here, down here, where it's lighter than the shadows of the body on the bodice and the arm, that means that it makes that elbow kind of move towards you. And where the arm is darker and less contrasted, it means that it's moving away from you. So a really good example of that is if you look at her hair in the original. I'll do a screen share again. Oh, I will do, hopefully. There we go. So if you sort of have a look at her hair, and particularly her bun, you get the impression that that is round because we've got this darker area where the head, like the hair meets the head, and then it kind of comes out in this bulbous lines. But we've got this really light contrast highlight on there. And because we've got these contrasts, that creates the feeling that that head is round. But because we've got less contrast on the arm and it's more sort of subtle shades of grey and less contrasted, that pushes that arm away from us. So it makes the head look closer than the arm. So that's something to really kind of keep in mind when we start to paint this. Also, yeah, you can see, you know, like what I was saying on the arm about the lower arm, where there's a lot less kind of, it's contrast, it's a darker grey and there's a tiny little bit of highlight and it's quite subtle. That really makes that arm push away from you. And then the skirt, because we've got the dark areas with the white sort of sparkles and spots all over it, that brings the flip of that skirt towards us because we've got a lot of contrast on it. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So we're not thinking about, okay, this is where that hair ends, this is where that arm ends. We're thinking, right, where would have a highlight, where would have a shadow, and that will kind of do more for your painting than going, right, I need to do a thick white line around this arm because that's where the edge of the arm is. Okay. So I'm going to start off by going back into her and building up some of my lightness and shadow. And something to keep in mind as well with when we paint shades of white on top of each other is that as white dries, it becomes a little bit more see-through. So you will, for example, where I've done sort of like all the ruching on the sleeve, that is layers of white built up on top of each other rather than it being kind of like lots and lots of shades of grey. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. So we're going to sort of work on her dress while our background's drying, and then we'll come back and we'll do some stars and things once that's all nicely kind of flat. It also gives us an idea as whether or not we need to go and have a look at kind of doing a third coat if it hasn't gone really, really flat. So I've got my grey, my sort of mid-grey colour that I've already mixed up, and I'm going to start to work some of that into the painting. So I'm going to keep with my 1/2 inch flat brush. I'm going to start on the skirt basically to get you kind of nice and working quite fluid and loosely, and then before we start to move up into the body. So using my grey colour, so this is the same one as I was using before, but I'm going to use it much more thickly, a little bit less watery, so that I'm going to cover some of these areas where I've sort of used it quite wet and watery to see the lines. And I'm going to start up at the kind of the bodice, and I'm going to start to bring my lines down, and I'm going to let my paint run out and let it sort of fade into the black of the lower skirt, and then I'm going to come back later and I'm going to do the opposite way with some of the black and bring some of the black through, and just keep building this up until I'm happy with it. So you're not committed with any of this. You can go back over it and change it if you're not happy with it. Sounds like my daughter's wrecking the kitchen out there. So you want nice, fluid, sort of movementy strokes. If you're crossing over into lines that you've done and things, that's absolutely fine. You'll find, you know, this is kind of your lines and what works for you as well. So I think the light is shining quite a lot on my grey, and it looks a lot lighter than it is. So you see I've got areas where the grey goes down a lot lower, and other areas where it stops quite sort of higher up the skirt. And while this is still wet, you can also, if you want to, don't have to wait for it to dry. Give your brush a bit of a wipe out, and you can pick up some black, and you can take some of your black up. Don't sort of go for blending, go for strokes. So do a kind of a couple of strokes into your grey and then stop. Don't sort of overwork it. Cool. So I'm going to leave this kind of grey at the top of the skirt to dry off for a little bit, and then have another sort of look at it. Hopefully once it's dried off, you'll see that it's kind of, actually I might turn the light down and see if that works a bit better. There you can see that's a bit closer to the actual colour, I think. I do want to bring some of the black through, particularly around by the elbow. So I'm going to let that grey dry off a little bit and then see what I want to do with it, where I want to tweak it and sort of lighten it and darken it and things like that. I'm going to look up here at the body now. So I'm going to switch over to my smaller brush. And first thing I want to do is start to get that shadow in around the waistband. And come down the side of the arm. And then I've got these shadows of kind of where she's twisting, and also the fabric on the dress is twisting as well. So this is one of those ones where don't think, oh, okay, she's got even pleats. It's try and be really just suggestive with your strokes. And I've got a bit of a shadow up here above that bodice, but it's kind of on the other side of the body coming across, right under where the neckline is, and then I'll fill in up to the neckline. So I'm going to take virtually the bottom of that, the sort of the puff on the right hand sleeve. I'm going to almost take all of that away. So it doesn't matter that we've lost that, because we're going to just add a few dots, a few little sparkles on that, and that will come back totally. So, and then keeping those lines, curved lines, again, take away most of the top of that sleeve as well. So you can dry brush this a lot as well, and just kind of shade in a little bit. Just leave a little bit of a highlight, a guide for you to see what you want where. later on. Okay, so coming out from the left hand side of the neck, I've got this shadow that kind of comes along the middle of her sort of puff and down into where the top of the arm is. And then we've got this bodice, an arm that's wrapping round. And again, very little info there. So we don't need to sort of put too much in there. We come down, meet the sleeve, and then we've got basically some shadow. So using my thin brush, black paint, I'm just gonna take a bit of shadow down. Again, don't be tempted to put too much information in there. We're just going to go underneath the elbow and back up. So I'm going to bring some, when that grey's dried, I'm going to bring some sort of black pleats down into the skirt, but my grey's too wet at the moment to do that. So I'm then going to look at her hair. So the thing with painting hair is you don't paint individual strands. You basically paint hair in sections. So that's the best way to sort of describe it. So you put a few individual little kind of marks in, but it's just like anything else, it's blocks. And then you just kind of add some details onto the block. So I've got this darker area up near the top of her head. I'm going to have some lighter strands coming down, so I need something for that to contrast again. So I'm going to bring that down and around the left hand side of her head. And then we've got this darker area here that I'm going to just really lightly sketch in where her bun and the base of her head meet. So I'm going to make that bigger than the dark area, bigger than I want it to end up, because I'm going to build up layers of grey over the top of it. How's everyone getting on? Yeah? Okay, cool. So the next step after this, while we've got our thin brush, is, I think for me personally, like the scariest bit, which is doing this arm. And hand, and really can't stress it enough, you don't need to put loads of detail. You don't have to worry too much about the fingers and the thumb. It's all about the highlights on this, because the light is shining onto her fingertips. So again, when you look at that painting, there's information there because you can see where her fingertips are, but you can actually see very little of the rest of her arm. You can't really see, or hand, should I say, you can't really see where the hand ends on the sort of right hand side of it. And you can sort of break it down quite easily in that way. So I'm going to use my mid grey again. So I've done a light wash over this, but I'm going to lock in. Now that one is my cat. I can hear my cat sneezing in the kitchen. So I'm going to block in my grey. So if you have a bit of a wobble, don't worry about it, because we can just go over it with black. I'm going to block in my hand this side. The other thing is, you don't have to have straight lines on things. And it's something I really struggled when I was learning to get my head around. Whereas actually you're making your job much more difficult. So I switched over to a really kind of fine brush just to do those fingers. And I'm going to come back basically and with sort of a bit of dry brushing with some black, and add in some shadow and go around the edges and just basically sort of work the edges away so that I can let whoever looks at the painting do the work rather than me, which is always a much better way of doing stuff. Okay, so my black hasn't gone very flat around the fingertips, so I'm just going to darken that there because I'm going to have a little star there, so I want that bit to be really nice and dark. Okay. So once we start adding some of the contrast, you'll start to really get an idea of what's going on with your painting and what you want to sort of add where and things like that. So it's always harder at this sort of stage to start to kind of see where things are going. But I'm going to start now to add a little bit of contrast in, which will help us to sort of see certain areas and judge where other things are sitting. So I'm going to keep some of my grey. So definitely sort of don't lose that at the moment. Keep an eye on it, don't let it dry out. And you might have to like just nip a bit of water onto it at some stage just to stop it from being sort of totally lost. And what I'm going to do using my thinnest brush, so I'm switching over to my clean water now to make sure it doesn't go too sludgy. And I'm going to use a little bit of just plain white paint. This is just, again, the Crawford and Blacks, kind of from the works, nice and cheap. And the good thing is about this is because it's not the most expensive, it is a bit on the see-through side, but we can use that to our advantage. So just with white paint, I'm going to start to put in some of the areas where I know I want my sort of my most highlighted. So I'm probably going to have to do this a couple of times to really get a good highlight on there. But for now, it's a really good guide for me to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to start to put in some of these creases in the fabric on the right hand side of her dress. And I want this longer one to come across here. And I can bring a little bit of creases into the shoulder. And as I was saying about, I can just put in with a little suggestion. There's some sparkles, a little bit of shading, and I put even though I've not painted in that right shoulder, I've just indicated that there's something there, which straight away puts it in without me having to paint it. So, yeah. And then I can come in, now I've got that sort of started to put in some of my highlights, I can start to actually see where things are sitting and tweak them as I need to. So I've got this waistband here. I want to bring this shoulder forward as well, this left hand one, so that's going to be a lot lighter. I can start to put in a bit of detail in here. So I'm going to put on this bit of lighter area. That's the area kind of where the dress goes across the back of her neck. some details. So again, a few little strokes. With the white, and then I'm just going to do, going down her arm, I'm going to just put in a few little lines. I can tidy up those afterwards, but this is just starting to put in some of the kind of the creases of the fabric in her sleeve. Cool. And then I'll just keep coming backwards and forwards, building up until I'm happy. So we've got a little suggestion of the front of a bodice, which is just out to the left. I'm going to do a little bit of a vertical line, and suddenly her dress has got a front to it. I can do a little, with hardly any paint on, I'm just going to do this tiny little highlight on her arm, and now that's an arm wrapping round without us having to do very much of anything else to it. So I've got a little bit of a neck coming up here, or a shoulder. And on the right hand side over here, we're going to have most of it obscured by her bun, but I'm just going to bring that out a little bit. So what I'm going to do is just ever so slightly bring that in a little bit at a time until I'm happy that that looks like she's got a nice sort of slender shoulder or neck there, rather than it's kind of like a little bit of a wide neck. And I can darken it down if I need to. Cool. So I'm going to just start to put in some of my highlights around the tips of my fingers, because that's where she's touching the star. So that's where she's going to have these highlights. The light's just shining off of tips of her fingers and thumb. And I don't know what it's called, but on the inside bit of her hand here. So the light would be shining around there. And just a little bit of the light coming down on the sort of left hand side of her wrist there. So these are really sort of quite subtle contrasts. We don't want, we're going to make those sort of dry brush a bit of dark on there, and we'll probably come back and kind of go over some of the whiter bits around where the star is to really brighten those up. But for now, that's giving us more of an idea. We're starting to get a bit of kind of depth to the painting at this point now. So you can do the same with your thin paintbrush and your white with the hair. So I'm going to start to put in some of the highlights up in that dark area, and then I can use my grey to sort of darken, and my black and things like that, and start to build this up. So first thing is I've got this kind of meeting, like a little bit of a strand that comes over the top, but divides kind of her head from where her sort of arm is. And then I had these two strands that kind of came round. Kind of got a couple of loose strands. Don't be tempted to sort of do too many sort of loose strands, even though you know, in real life you would have these looser ones. It's all about suggestion, even with the hair. So once we've got the kind of outsides of the hair, how we want them, and the right kind of size, we know what we're doing with the insides and where we're going to put our shadows. So that's why I'm kind of painting these highlights in now at this stage. So I'm not really liking that one down there. So I can paint over, as soon as that's dried off, I can kind of paint that in a bit darker and things like that before I'm too committed, too far along, and sort of would have to take out the whole lot again. So you can see I've kind of started to put in the highlights. I've got that one area that I'm not keen on, which is that bottom one. So I can sort of at this stage take this out very easily. So I'll just take that one out. There. And yeah, I think that works a bit better for the head shape. And then I'm going to do the same with just my white. Start to put in sort of where my bun's going to be. Again, just like with the head, don't be tempted. Put a few sort of stray strands in, but don't be tempted to do too many, and don't be tempted to do too much detail. So I'm going for the lighter bit in the middle. And I'm actually going to stand up for this bit. Come up. So there's not a massive gap between kind of the bottom of her head and where the bun starts. So I'm going to kind of almost make those meet. And then I can do a couple of little sort of stray strands that they're sort of following the curve. So they're not really sticking out. They're not sticking out at an angle. They're still following the curve of the bun that we've painted, but they're just kind of unraveled a bit rather than anything else. So my white on my bodice has started to dry off and sort of tone back into the grey underneath, so I can come back with some more white where I want my real highlights. So I'm not going anywhere near as sort of long stroke wise as I did with the first lot. I'm just picking out the highlights, and you start to get your sort of different shades of grey coming down the sleeve like that. I don't really think I want to touch this arm. I'm quite happy with that. So I do need a bit more highlights on the body, I think, though. So I can do some of those with some more white along the very outer edge. Oh, a bit too much on the brush. But again, I'm only going pretty much over half of the lines that I did. first time. Take that out to me. There we go. And just take the edge of that. So instead of it kind of going in and up, I've just scooped it a little bit. So it's following the line of the dress a bit more. And then I can use my grey from earlier. And I can bring that in and across. Don't forget, if you go sort of, you lighten it up a bit too much and you're not happy with it, you've got the black, it is just black out of the tube, so you can always kind of tweak it and take some sort of darken it down and things like that if need be. So exactly the same with the hair. We can sort of pop in, now we know where we're kind of going with it, we can pop in some of the grey. And then we can come back and add more shadows or more highlights. As we want. So I'm just going to go along. I can now start to, if I feel like her arm is too thin, I can sort of use some of the grey and just dry brush out around the edges. If I feel that it's too thick, I can sort of use a bit of black and just gently go over it with a tiny little bit of paint and start to just play with the edges of things, or the suggestion of the edges of things. So I'm going to take a little bit of grey down because at the moment her arm isn't quite set. There we go. Her arm doesn't quite meet her sleeve. So once we've got this lower grey area and it's starting to, it's drying off now, if there's any other sort of areas of black that you wanted to add to it, you could do that now. So if you want to darken any bits up, even up any bits, you can do. So I wouldn't overwork it though. I sort of try and stick to nice fluid strokes. And also you can, if you want to go over any of your grey bits, you can do. So I've got this line that comes here in my original that I want to put back in. So I'm going to pop that in from just under the elbow. So we're kind of creating this sort of very floaty, loose look to this dress, and it will sort of take on a bit of a life of its own once we start to put the highlights on that in a minute. So just fade out a little bit of black over that strong line that I had there. Everyone doing okay? Yeah, anyone, do you want me to have a look at how you're doing, give you any sort of suggestions or anything? Do you want to look at the screenshot of the original?
I wouldn't mind a bit of help with my lower arm. Yeah, it's just not quite right.
Cool. Let me, right, I switched it over to gallery, so let's have a look. Okay. Oh, you've done really well considering you've sort of sketched that out yourself.
Oh, thank you.
That's lovely. I think it's just a bit strong at the moment.
Okay.
I think proportion wise, it's looking really good. So what if you look at mine, if you see the sleeve,
Yeah,
it kind of, the sleeve, the elbow is lower
yeah,
than my arm, whereas your arm is lower than your elbow.
yeah,
So if you use some black,
yeah.
just take off, change the angle,
Bring it more.
in.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Lovely.
you.
Very good. So I'm going to, now I want to kind of start to lose this arm into the background a little bit. I just want it to just sit back a little bit away from the hair. And how I'm going to do that is by just a little bit of shading, a little bit of dry brushing with some black over the edges of this arm, create a bit of shadow on the back of the hand and down either side of the arm. And I also want to bring the contrast up on the hair where it meets the arm. So dry brushing is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. So it's painting with hardly any paint on your brush. Ruth, have you done dry brushing before? Okay, so to do dry brushing, basically you take a dry brush. So you take a bit of paint. So I've got a bit of black. I'm going to do this on my hand just so you can see what I'm doing. And you basically take almost all of the paint off. And ideally you want quite a sort of, if you've got like a hog's hair brush or anything that's got a little bit of kind of spring to it, but you can do it with softer ones. And you just rub your brush over the area that you want to put some shading on. And it just gives you this really soft, subtle shading. So if you ever paint like clouds or landscapes, it's a fantastic way of giving yourself like a soft mistiness to your painting. But on something like this, it's really good for just creating a bit of shading.
What colour are you using for that?
Black.
Black, yeah, it is. I thought it was, but I wasn't sure.
So you can see I've just by rubbing over that arm with a little bit of black paint, like the tiniest little bit of black paint, I've given a little bit of shading and shadow, and now that arm is pushed back. So So the key to that is really, it really is, it's dry brushing. It's having virtually no paint on your brush at all. And if you go down the edges of your paint, your arm, it will kind of just push that right away. And you can equally do the same thing. So if you give your brush like a really good wipe out, if you've gone too far and it's gone too dark, or you want to add a really subtle amount of kind of like contrast to it, you do the same with white. So this is white paint, and I'm going to take most of it off onto my hand, and then where I want to create a little bit of a highlight, adjust and just ever so slightly bring it out. And you see I've just added this tiny little highlight to my arm on there.
Cool, thank you.
That's okay. So what's really great is when you get, so the next step up from dry brushing is, or the next sort of thing to have a go at, is a thing called scumbling, which is the same principle. So you use a tiny bit of paint on your brush, but you use, so for example, if you would use it if you were painting a sunset or a sunrise, and you get those really beautiful kind of like glowing colours. So you would use opposite colours. So you would use like a pale blue over an orange, and you dry brush it over the top, and it makes the colours glow because they clash against each other and react. So my little bit of art history, that's how Monet does his sunsets. And yeah, so that's really, like if you stare at something orange and then you look away and you see the blue after image of it, or red and green or something like that, it's exactly the same principle. Those two colours are reacting in your eyes, and they make the paints really glow. So I'll stop rambling now.
That's great.
So where are you guys up to?
The arm.
Yeah, they're trying the dry brushing.
Okay, cool. So the next step on from there with the dry brushing, and really, have a play with the dry brushing. When you do something that's got these long, bold, sweeping kind of strokes, and you want to keep that free sort of, really loose feel to it, you can use dry brushing to just sort of rein them in a little bit and sort of start to put your shadows and things like that in without interfering too much with your stroke. So it's quite a useful little tool for these kinds of things, where you can add a little bit of shadow and depth to stuff without actually having to repaint it, and you can add some detail in that way. So it's quite a useful little tool for things like that as well. The next step up along from here is to we're going to pop our stars in, and so how you decide to do this next step is totally up to how brave you are. So step one, and one way of doing this, and always to get the most realistic stars, is to take a paintbrush, wet it, get some white paint on, and with your thumb flick like that over your painting. So that's a great thing to do if you're early on in your painting and you can afford to kind of repair it. If you're a bit nervous about doing that, or you're a bit worried that you might actually kind of like flick it all over your painting itself or your lady, which when you get this far into a painting, I totally understand. What I do is I use a selection of different sized brushes and so different sized round brushes, and I will just dot them. And it's really hard to get them to look random when you paint them by hand. But what does definitely help is using different sized brushes. So what we want to do is put one just at her fingertips. Get a really good, nice sort of round one there. And then I'm going to come back with my absolute smallest brush later on and put a little cross into that. You can also use a little bit of card and print there if you want to. So, but I'm going to pop in some stars and try and make them look as random as possible. I'm going to take them down to about level with her arm. And the only reason I'm doing that is because when we come to do her skirt and her dress, we can have loads of sparkles on there. So we don't want to leave a little bit of a gap between them. So because this is a black and white painting, I'm going to leave my stars I'm going to do them just in white, but I do like to try and do slightly different colours with them when I do coloured paintings with stars in. I do find that you get quite a nice sort of it creates, because of the different shades and the warmer shades coming out towards you and stuff, it does create a little bit of sort of depth to your stars as well. So I'm going to change over to a slightly smaller brush and get in some smaller stars. So even when I do, you can do some in grey as well, actually. Even when if I do splatter with a paintbrush my stars on, any painting I do, I will always kind of put a few in by hand just to sort of kind of have a few. I might put in a few bigger ones, or I might cluster some together, but just so you've got them exactly where you want them. So some of them I put close together. We've got, it's in our nature, survival thing, that we can recognise patterns, and so we create patterns without even realising that we're doing it.
Half an hour.
So it is quite hard to paint spots and make them look random. Cool, and then I'm just gonna go back with my white, just go over the star that she's, don't know whether she's taking it from the sky or placing it in the sky. So that, and then I can just again go over very tips of the fingers. I'm going to then take almost all of my paint off of my white brush, and I'm just going to, it's up to you whether you do it straight or at an angle, but I'm just going to put like a little twinkle on that star that is in her fingertips. Like that. Okay, so now I go back over my thin brush. I'm going to go back over the areas that I want to be really, really bright white, so the really contrasted bits. And I can also now start to bring in some of the highlights down on the main part of her hair. So I've sort of already said this is as much about what you leave out as what you paint in. So I might use my thin brush and take some of the grey out. And then I can add in anywhere I want some, maybe some more shadows, put back in on her bodice. Any bits there I want to take any bits out, I can do that with the black now. I can run a few little creases across her arm, so always following the curve of her arm there. I'm really happy with this arm, so I'm not going to touch.
Yeah. Your homemade food is
So you guys let me know when you've got to that kind of stage, and then we'll have a look at her skirt.
Will do.
Cool.
You like?
yeah, you're still on it.
How's it going?
It's going.
I like your stitched t-shirt.
Thank you.
Oh, cool. many years ago, I used to be a graphic designer for Disney.
Wow.
So, so I used to like do the prints that went on T-shirts for things like Disney Store and Disneyland in Japan, and so
It does. It sounds interesting. Okay.
Okay.
No. Well,
so this really is kind of about sort of shaving little bits off and just tweaking until you get it, because you've done those bold strokes to start off with. You sort of can just, with your highlights and your shadows, use that sort of to create your depth and your movement and your shadows and things like that.
Daddy, never pack lunch.
yeah.
While you guys are doing that, I'll just talk through the next step, which is going to be putting the lines and the dots on the skirt. And where it comes to painting lines, the bit that's important and the bit that makes it easy or difficult is the thickness of the paint. And so to get a good line, regardless of what kind of line you're doing, you want really nice fluid paint, actually probably more fluid than you would think that you want. You don't want it watery, so we're not trying to paint with watercolors, but you want a really sort of wet fluidy paint that you can kind of get a nice long mark with without having to sort of worry about getting any lumps of paint or to sort of things like that. And you'd be surprised at how quickly the paint dries out and how you have to keep adding water to it to get a good line. So that's what we're going to work on. So I'm gonna, so you can paint lines with a normal fine brush. If you happen to have a brush that has got the really long bristles like this is called a lining or a rigging brush, and this is exactly what this is for. This doesn't make painting lines any easier. You still have to use the right consistency of paint, and you still need to not overload the brush. The only difference is that it holds more paint, so it means that you can paint for longer and paint longer lines. That is the only difference from using a different, like a normal kind of fine brush like this. So that's, so yeah, so if you got a bit of Christmas, got a Christmas gift card and you want to treat yourself to something, they're only a couple of pounds, but they're that and a fan brush, they're great little tools to have if you're really going for it, like a saber brush, which is one of those angled ones as well. If you like painting flowers or leaves, these are brilliant. But I would definitely recommend treating yourself to, just for a couple of pounds, is one of these lining brushes. So I'm actually not going to start off not using that. I'm going to use a pretty much probably a 1/2 inch flat or a kind of big. So actually I've just reached across. I've got a number 8 round. So, oh dear, Sally's dying.
I know, sorry.
No, that's all right. So I'm going to add lots and lots of water to my paint and get a really nice fluid paint mix going. So I'm looking for something that, although it's still kind of hopefully sort of opaque and not too, I don't want it so watery it's like watercolor, but I definitely want it that if I tipped my palette it would run. And then from that I'm going to use my lining brush or my thin sort of detail brush. And lining brushes they're great. They are actually a little bit funny to get used to and a bit difficult to control. So it's actually probably easier using the smaller brush. And I'm going to start to put in some lines, and I want nice, big, sweeping kind of fluid lines. So I'm going to start off over here on the left-hand side, and I'm going to, just like with the grey, I'm going to let my oh, cat's knocking everything over. I'm going to let the kind of the paint run out and disappear. And I'm going to get a few sort of key lines in and then start to add slowly a few more around. So the cat just knocked over. So we've got some squirrels that live outside our house, and we had some nuts at Christmas, so I put nuts on our windowsill, and now he comes over every day and bangs on the glass because he wants his breakfast. So now I've had to go and buy, yeah, as if I don't have enough animals, I now have to go and buy nuts for a squirrel that has adopted us. So I'm not putting too many curves. So when I say it's a curved line, it's not a wavy line going sort of down around the skirt. It's like, it doesn't change directions too often. And I've painted 2 lines, and I've already, my paint started to sort of thicken up. If you find that your kind of your lines start as getting lumps on it, your paint's too thick. If you find that it's kind of a bit claggy, your paint's too thick. If you've kind of got blobs that, like, it goes sort of too thick, you've got too much paint on you. If you're painting a line that's thicker than you want it to be, it's because you've got too much paint on your brush. So on the right hand side, I'm going to go back to doing a screen share so you can see. Oh, keep forgetting to do that little button there. There we go. You can see more. I can move this bar for me. So we're not stuck to where our grey is, particularly around the bottom of the skirt. This is kind of, it's meant to be like sheer layers of fabric. So start off at the waist and then kind of come down and out and things like that, so that you're creating your layers. And I've got those crossed over ones that I really liked, so I'm gonna put those in.
Can you go back to your picture, Penny?
In one sec. So I was in the middle of doing a line.
That's all right.
There we go. Can you see it again? Yeah. Oh. Now once I've got a few of them in that are where I want, I can start to kind of put a few more in. Don't overdo the lines on this, and don't be afraid to kind of do them branching off of each other, and have some that kind of blend into each other and things.
Almost 2 years.
Yeah.
She was fighting that right up. We were afraid. She was we ran off. Truly was twice. My son is that. Lost, I was so low. Even with flat foot. The hands in front. Wow. So easy to say the woman's the tower of the one. Before we fall, before we go.
And I'm going to do across the bottom a couple of wavy lines, which is kind of like the hem of the layers of skirt. So I'm going to just tilt this so that I can get into this angle here. I've left big areas of kind of like just black, and I'll just take that one up into there. And what I'm going to do is add my kind of sparkles and things like that into those areas, and then I'll come back and look at where I want to add things like sort of additional lines and stuff like that. So with the sparkles, I'm going to go back and use the same brushes as I did for my stars. And if you have a look at, I'm just going to go back and screen share the original again. Oh, there we go. If you have a look, you can see where, as I've got the curved lines, I've also got lines of sparkles. They're not just kind of placed randomly, evenly all over the skirt. You have these kind of like almost following the same lines as the the sort of fabric fold lines in the skirt. So you can see there's a really good one where, so you've got this line that comes down and then the line of the fabric stops, but the sparkles carry on down across the bottom of the skirt. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, and also sort of concentrated along the areas on either side, and then we can also start to take them up into the dress as well. So do you want me to leave that on there for now or go back to my painting?
Ooh,
I can switch between the two.
yeah, go back to yours for a minute to
Okay.
start it, and then go back to this one if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm going to, so I've got this kind of nice, these two are curving here. So what I'll do is I'll put a few of my sparkles, and I go over as well my sort of white line, because it adds a bit of highlight to it as well. These ones I'm making a little bit bigger. So that's giving me my basic line. Here. And I'm going across the hem so it looks like it's on the layer that's kind of underneath. And then I'm going to do a few little kind of individual little clusters and the odd one here and there, but I wouldn't want to sort of do too many that were particularly like one by themselves. Do little clusters of them. And I'm also going to do some just outside skirt. Plus this is good for if you've got any sort of bits where your paint's gone a little bit patchy or uneven, you can hide a bit of a multitude of sins with these. So do sort of spread them out around as well. Don't be sort of too rigid to where your lines are. Do some in amongst there. So I'm using my larger brush. I'm going to get most of mine in, and then I'll come back with my sort of thinner one and do some small little tiny ones. So I'm going to do a few up on the bodice as well while I'm here. So they obviously show up more on the darker areas. I mean, you can even do some in her hair if you want to. It's definitely worth sort of taking a bit of time and with the spots and the sparkles to sort of add different sizes and sort of your different clusters. So I'm going to switch over to my smaller brush now. And don't forget, you can use this to add edges to things and sort of make sleeves wider and sort of reposition things if you want to. once I've got the majority of my spots on, I can go back and have a look to see if I want to add any more detail lines. They don't have to be full length, so you can just pop a little bit of something in here and there if you need to. And with the smaller brush, kind of going around the edges of things a bit more. So if I've got a cluster, for example here, I'm going to use the small brush to widen it so it's not so kind of just like a line, it's sort of wider and a bit softer. I'm not normally one to say sort of, you know, like fiddle with a painting and play with it, but this is definitely one I think you have to sort of do your spots and your lines, and then you have to kind of give it a second and come back to it and have a look and see if you need to sort of add any more sparkles anywhere or any more highlights. And I mean, all paintings need a bit of space before you go, actually, okay, yeah, that's done or that's not done. But I think this one's a definite, oh yeah, it needs a spot here, it needs a spot there, it needs an extra line there, or a little, that bit there needs to be a little bit lighter. So and it's, you know, it's amazing what on something like this where it is sort of monotone, a little bit of shadow, a little bit more shadow on a sleeve, or a little bit more highlight on a bit of hair or on something will make a massive difference. Whereas if you've got a colour painting, the colour's doing the work for you and you can get away with a lot more. Whereas on something like this, you have to get the tone spot on for it to really work. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let my spots all dry off and then sort of have a little look at those before I finish, but I'm just going to use the last of the white that I've got on my brush, and any areas that I really want to bring up to be a really bright contrasted white colour. So I might just revisit the tips of her fingers. Might just pull a few little highlights through on the middle of her bun. The little bits on her dress. Might actually try turning the light off so you can see the contrast a little bit better. Let me see if this works, actually. Sometimes it does. Yeah, I think I might be able to see a little bit better. I'll put a few little lines in if I want to with my thinner brush. Wouldn't do too many though. I think I might, because I've got this gap here, I might put in, yeah, that sort of evens her dress up a little bit on my one. I haven't got that hem on the original one, but I think this one needed it. Right, I'm going to stop fiddling with my one because I think she's pretty much there now. And see how you guys are doing. Did you want to have a look at the original, or are you okay with?
Yeah, can we just have one last look?
Yeah, of course. I think this is also a kind of a good idea. You can also take a photo of this one on your phone and you get a detached view from it, or sort of step back and have a look at it. So you'll be able to see, you know, particularly with things like the arm, the sort of arm that's tucked round and stuff, you'll be able to see whether that's working or not. If you have a look, I think you might be better off waiting for daylight because you'll get a better idea of the contrast on it, but you'll be able to see whether that kind of links up to the elbow and whether the angles are right and things like that way.
Yeah. I don't think I've got enough contrast in my hair.
Do you want to, I'll go off the screen share. Do you want to? Yeah, I'd put a bit more shadow in there.
Yeah. So just
Yeah.
use a really thin brush and use the black.
Yeah, so just, you don't want to have, sorry, the cats are about to jump on the table. You don't want to have like you, so don't think about it being like lines of hair. Think about it, even if you have a look at your hair in the mirror,
Yeah.
and screw your eyes up, you'll notice that there's like chunks of it that are darker and chunks of it are lighter. That's a good way of kind of looking at hair and seeing how it works.
Yeah.
With the highlights and the lowlights. So yeah, that's something to kind of, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
So actually, if ever you're wondering how to paint something, doing the sort of looking at it and screwing your eyes up and then looking at the shapes of, because it takes the detail out, you can see the shapes of the kind of like the contrasts, and that's really helpful.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So I'm going to stay with you two guys, but I think what I'll do is I'll finish the recording now. So, but I'll stay on Zoom with you guys and give you a hand. So if you have been painting with me on Zoom, thank you very much for joining me. And as always, if you're on Facebook and you would like some feedback, we've got the Easy Does It Artists Hangout where you can post a photo of your painting and get some lovely feedback, and everyone else in the group will tell you what a lovely job you've done. And if you're a bit more shy and would like to send a photo either by email or via sort of direct message, and Maria and I are always very happy to give anyone any feedback and help you out if you got a bit stuck with anything. So please feel free to contact us any of those ways, and we're always really happy to give you a hand. And hopefully we'll see you again at another session. So I've booked in Zoom sessions for every Monday evening for January, and then February, if there's enough interest, I'll carry them on. So have a lovely evening, and hopefully I will see how you guys have got on soon. Bye.